Welcome to Reputation Revolution. This is the podcast where we help individuals like you to establish your voice in the marketplace, enhance the credibility of that voice, extend the reach of your story and your message, and finally, extract value from your efforts in building a meaningful personal brand that's both recognized and respected. Now, on with the show.
Thank you for joining us here on the Reputation Revolution. My name is Trevor Young. It is terrific to have your company. One of the trends I've been highlighting for quite a while now is around producing what I call a destination show. Instead of just doing a podcast or just a YouTube video, it's got a lot more meat to it. Make it multimedia so people can listen to it if they prefer that, or watch it on YouTube or read about it if necessary. You can cut it into snippets to share across social media. Give it a name. Create a sub-branded media property, as I've been calling it for a while now. Turn it into a platform. It's a destination show for a couple of reasons. A, people go looking for it. They subscribe to it, they opt in. It's a regular thing in terms of their content consumption. And B, with all the bite-sized snippets you're putting out there on the web, micro videos, quote cards, photos and images, pithy lessons learned, these all act as digital breadcrumbs to draw people back to your show. It's the destination, as it were. It's a doorway into your personal brand orbit. And for some people, it's how they find and interact with you. Yes, sometimes they might also connect with you on social media or sign up for your email newsletter, and that's a deeper level of connection. But if all they do is watch or listen to your show, absolutely happy days. At least you're building connection and trust, and which one day that might be parlayed into a commercial arrangement down the track, or not. It's all good. So if you're an entrepreneur, a professional expert, an emerging thought leader, and you want to take things up a notch or two, creating a destination show is potentially something you might want to have a think about. I'm not saying you have to create a show, by the way, but just let the idea perk a little bit. And this is a key theme of today's episode. My guest has a combination YouTube show and podcast. He's doing exactly this. He delivers stacks of terrific interviews with big names in their field, including Bilyeu, who's the co-founder of a billion-dollar company called Quest Nutrition, motivational speaker Les Brown, TV presenter Charley Boorman, who did the Long Way Around TV series with Ewan McGregor, author and podcaster James Altucher, and Anthony Trucks. He's a former NFL athlete and an American Ninja Warrior. Now, the YouTube channel that my next guest has done is close to 4 million views, and the podcast continues to grow in leaps and bounds. So how does he approach the production of such a show, and what motivates him to put himself out there like that, to play big and be bold? Let's ask him. His name is Mark Drager, and as you'll soon hear, he does the hard things. Welcome to the Reputation Revolution show, Mark, all the way from Canada.
Yes, Trevor, thank you so much. It's literally a different day for us when we're speaking right now in real time.
It is indeed. My eyes are just being opened. No, early morning for me, good afternoon for you, and the powers of Riverside and Zoom and all the technology we use. It's just fantastic to be able to talk to people around the world and hear different perspectives on life and business and leadership and personal branding and marketing and all the things which we're going to get into today. I'm tipping a free-flowing conversation, but before most people are probably listening to this on the podcast, but if you do go to the video, you'll see that both Mark and I do have shaved heads, and we're both wearing black T-shirts, and we obviously got the black T-shirt memo. So that's a good start.
Well, and I can't hold on. I cannot stress enough that sometimes things are aesthetic, but sometimes they're just functional. I mean, when your hair starts to thin, you got a few choices, right? When you want to look slim, you got only a few choices. So, like there is something to the aesthetic, but there's also something to just function, right? Exactly.
And don't let anyone ever tell you that having a shaved head is not hard work, because it requires a lot of maintenance. All right, we're off to a good start here. Mark, just tell us a little bit about what you're doing, because you've got an agency and a very popular it's a podcast and a YouTube show called We Do Hard Things. Can you walk us through both of those? What are you up to these days, and how in the hell do you get to all of these things?
For sure. Well, actually, today is our 16th year anniversary of the agency, Phantom Media, that I started back in 2006. And so happy anniversary to us. But
Absolutely.
When I started back in 2006, we started as a video production company. And I don't know how old maybe our listeners are, but they may remember that videos before YouTube was a thing, before Facebook was a thing, or Twitter or social media or online, they used to be things like, since 1983, people have been turning to XYZ company for blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And that's the world I grew up in. So I went to film school. I wanted to be a documentary filmmaker. Turns out there wasn't a lot of money in that. I worked in television, and I found myself working for an internet marketing franchise in-house. We had 1,500 offices. We were in 90 countries and territories, and they liked to communicate through video. And so I made videos for them. And when I left to start my agency, I thought, you know what? If I work for one company and makes X number of dollars, imagine if I worked for 10 companies, how much money I'd make. Mm-hmm. And that was my pitch to my wife. And so at 23 years old, with a newborn baby and my wife not working at the time, I quit my job and I said, I'm going to start this company. And we're going to flash forward a bunch because guess what? The first few years sucked, almost went bankrupt, had to hire a business coach, figured some stuff out, great recession hit, lost all of our money, almost lost everything. But along the first few years of struggle, what I realized is that people didn't come to me for video. Like maybe most of our listeners who are an expert in their domain, when you start out maybe, let's think of like a graphic designer or a dentist or a C-suite executive or an accountant. Like people, you develop a craft, but eventually people don't come to you because of the thing you make. They come to you because of how you think or what you do or the strategy or the outcome. Anyway, long story short, today what we do is we're brand strategists because eventually I get tired of making videos and I hire a huge team. We build a multi-million-dollar agency, but more and more and more people would come to me and say, I think I need to do something, but I don't know what. I don't know how it will look. I don't know what it will say. I don't know anything. And they would always say, like, you're the creative guys. But really what they appreciated is we would sit down and help them build a business case for maybe moving forward, or we would look at the cost benefit of all the different options, or we would look at the different target audiences or the low-hanging fruit or whatever it is to develop a strategy.
Yep. You've got to have that plan in place.
Yeah.
And are you focusing more now on the individual speakers, authors, entrepreneurs, that sort of thing, or is it still more brands, or how does that work?
Yeah, our main focus is really, I grew up in corporate. Like the advice early on was go where the money is, and there's money in corporate, but it's not always the most fun, and you can't necessarily maybe make the biggest impact. And so we love working with real people now. So entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants. And if you're responsible for your own destiny, your own brand, if it's all on your shoulders, if your name is there, if your reputation is there, you host the podcast on this stuff. So you know how important it is today, but we help them and their businesses basically figure out what to say and how to look and how to make people feel to sell more.
Excellent. Now let's get into the podcast too. How long has that been running for? You've got quite a few episodes there. Did it start as a podcast, move into a YouTube show, start as YouTube, go into a podcast, do both at once?
Yeah, I like to do everything the hard way.
Yeah, absolutely. Give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch on what the show's all about, because it's building up some pretty big numbers, and just give listeners and viewers a little bit of a feel for what do you cover on that show.
Yeah, well, We Do Hard Things is a YouTube show and a podcast, and so I started it about a little over 2 years ago now. It's my third podcast, and it really came out of during the pandemic. And honestly, I was working with my friend Evan Carmichael, and we had a podcast together, and I was doing a few other things, and everything. I just felt soft, honestly. Like I was like, there are badasses out there who aren't as afraid of things as I am, who don't let fear or doubt slow them down as much as I do. They go off and live this adventurous life, or they have the courage to say what they believe and have convictions. And I just felt so safe and soft, and I didn't want to take a stand with people, and I didn't want to offend anyone, and I didn't want to make anyone mad. And this bled into all areas of my life. Like, like I would always do things for others, but I felt guilty putting myself first. I bent over backwards to have my schedule work for everyone else, but I felt guilty by saying, no, you know what? I'm going to take an afternoon to be with my kids, or getting physically fit, or getting healthy, or being more courageous to ask people, like I asked you, hey, can I come on your podcast and can we connect? I would have never done any of those things. Yep. And so We Do Hard Things is really for those of us who are dreamers or creative entrepreneurs who need to hear the stories like I do of people who have the courage to be dedicated, to put themselves first, to pursue their passions at all costs. They know that if they show up as their very best in their zone of genius, doing what their God-given talent was, they will be able to show up in other places better for others. And so, we talk to entrepreneurs and athletes and professors, which I never expected, at some of the biggest and coolest schools and universities, and authors and all kinds of really badass people who have basically gone off and done the stuff that I wish I had the courage to do.
So I'll drop in there that you've at that point of recording, you've had something like 3.8 million views. You've got a good following subscription wise. That's without even looking at the podcast, which we can get into numbers there if you know what they are. But the caliber of the it was really great to get you onto the show. You're attracting some really high caliber guests. You've got someone like, and some of these names, they're big in their space. People might not know them, but you go and check them out, and they, people like Lisa Bilyeu, who's a co-founder of a $1 billion company called Quest Nutrition, I think that was called. You've had Les Brown on. He's the famous motivational speaker. You mentioned Evan Carmichael. He's a YouTube guru. He's got over 3.5 million subscribers on YouTube, so I think he knows what he's doing. Charley Boorman, you've also had, who was with Ewan McGregor, wasn't he, in a documentary?
Yeah, he's mates with Ewan McGregor. They rode around the world, and yeah.
Debbie, I'll just drop another couple of names because this is going to really, I guess, lock into what we want to talk about today. You've had Debbie Millman, who's, designer, writer, artist, author, TED Talk speaker. James Altucher, who I think he's a fantastic podcaster. I love his books. He's a bit of a different cat, but he's done some really interesting things. And Anthony Trucks, who's a former NFL athlete and American Ninja Warrior. So that's a real mix. They're going to get a more mixed bag of people there, but clearly they've all got their own stories, and there's a lot more where that came from on the podcast. Walk us through and I want to break it down as to how you approach your show. But in terms of, you said you were someone who didn't sort of go hard, reach out, all of that sort of stuff, and you're now starting to. These are big names. How are you getting them on the show?
Well, you want me to give away all my secrets? No, I
not
totally
all of them.
will.
Just,
So
just 98%. Thanks.
yeah, no, I totally will. So I often look at different situations and try to come up with a framework. I'm as much as I'm a creative, originally I wanted to be an architect and engineer. And so I just like frameworks and I like to figure out how things work. So if you're approaching a podcast like mine, which is interview based, now there's all kinds of different podcasts, but mine is like this. I want to connect with people, pick their brains, find out what they think and how they think. You need 4 things to make a successful podcast, especially if it's going to be something that you're not going to get excited about, start, and then stop a few weeks later, and start and stop a few weeks later. You need 4 things. First, you need a booking strategy. You need a way to get people on your podcast. And what I did day one is I hired a booking agent. Now, I hired a booking agent because, honestly, I wanted to have conversations with the type of people where it's the same. I own a business. I don't do outbound sales in my business. Like I'm not going to pick up the phone and cold call people. If I need that, I'll hire someone to do that. And I needed it for my podcast, so I hired someone to be my booking agent. And what it allowed me to do right off the bat, right away day one, is start connecting to, like, I could have really big asks, and then the person, my agent, will come back and be like, "Hey, we got them." George Mumford may be a name that people know or don't know, but he wrote The Mindful Athlete. He was the guy who was brought in by Phil I just forgot his name now. The coach of Chicago Bulls in the '90s, and then the LA Lakers, Phil Jackson. So George Mumford was brought in by Phil Jackson to teach mindfulness to Michael Jordan and the Bulls, and then later the Lakers. I read his book a year ago, and I go, I gotta talk to George Mumford, and my booking agent goes out and tries to make contact with him, and 9 months later, we get a booking. And this is like us trying to get them on. And then this was supposed to be this week. And then he had a flight. So they said, oh, don't worry, we're not canceling. We're just moving it to March. So now it's going to have been a year that we've been working to try and have this conversation. But for each person that's on the podcast, I know that block number one is if it was just on me on booking, I wouldn't either have the connection, or I wouldn't know how to pitch myself properly, or I wouldn't have the ask. So I feel comfortable texting my agent and saying, like, do you think we can get this person? And they don't have an emotional connection. So if we get rejected, he's just like, no, they didn't want to do it with you. And we get rejected a lot, but I'm willing to have a big ask because it's not me on the line. So step number one is you have to figure out who and where your booking is going to come from, because all of the big shows have booking agents. Step two will be production. Great. You're going to do it in person, or you're going to do it this way. No big deal. Just get some way to get it produced. Step three is, what are you going to do for post-production? Who's your team? How are you going to edit it? How are you going to package it? Are you going to do social releases or not? What are you going to do to get it edited? And then lastly, distribution. So that's out to social media, and that's scheduling and all those things. I think too many people jump into podcasting thinking that the production thing is the thing they need to figure out. And that is the simplest thing in the world. What you and I are doing right now on Riverside or on Zoom, or with just my Google Pixel sitting on a table at a coffee shop, that is the easiest thing in the world. But to get people onto your podcast and booked, you have to understand why they would come on and who you are and your hook. And then you got to figure out how to get it made, and you got to figure out how to get it out.
Yes. Yeah, that's true, and that's it is all encompassing. I mean, you break it down into the social media bits. You've got the podcast side. Now most people are doing YouTube as well because the technology is allowing us to do that. The distribution happens once, but the promotion happens ongoing, and people come onto your show because you build a platform, and so they will check you out and they'll look at all the elements and they'll see, where you sit in the world, and whether they resonate with you and your message and your story, and have you put a bit of thought into it, I think is probably the key. I've seen some podcasts who aren't necessarily massively big, but they've had some pretty big guests on, and it's because they're approachable and they think their way through, and they're thoughtful in their commentary and that sort of stuff. So it's about knowing yourself, isn't it? Knowing yourself, what you want to achieve, and not trying to jump on every little tool and tactic, but really knowing why you're doing what you're doing.
Well, and I can't stress enough, you have to understand it, what's in it for your guest. Why would they come on? And when you're starting, you don't have the numbers. So you don't have the monthly downloads, you don't have the listeners, you don't have the engagement, you don't have the views, you don't have any of those things. And so part of me, connecting with a booking agent right away helped, but we got to be realistic about this. Like if I wanted to reach out, and I have my top 10 list of people, but like for example, I read over the summer Phil Collins' memoir, and I would love to speak to Phil Collins. I would love to connect with Phil Collins. And I think we might even be reaching out to Phil Collins to try and get him on the podcast. But the point is, if Phil Collins is not in promotion mode, if he's not taking meetings, if he's not doing this type of thing, then why would Phil Collins come on my podcast? Well, maybe he doesn't get asked a lot. It's a really curious and interesting thing. Maybe he hates them and he thinks that we're all a bunch of idiots because we're not like superb enough or not. So we got to wait for him to be in promo mode. And then if he's in promo mode, what's he promoting and why? But people get caught up on the numbers. And so when we started, now we're 2 years into this, and I have a team helping me. And so this is not an inexpensive approach, but I knew we wouldn't have the numbers. So why would someone come onto my podcast? Well, one, I want to have a conversation that they wouldn't have anywhere else. So this comes down to the pitch. I know of a podcast where this gentleman only talks about fatherhood, and he's had some of the biggest names on his podcast without a lot of listeners and with kind of being not well known, simply because he's talking about a subject that all of these men frankly never get asked about. You know, if you're Peyton Manning, you may not be getting asked about fatherhood, and it may be dearly important to you, so you're going to come on and talk about it. So the pitch can help you stand out.
Yep.
For us, I mean, you talked about YouTube show versus podcast. We've gone all in on YouTube show. So we are producing like a level of assets. I want this to look and feel like a television show. I want this to be extremely well produced. I want to be a great storyteller. I want to retain our audience and have great numbers. So frankly, when someone comes on, they know they're going to be taken care of. They know they're going to be looked after. They know it's going to be a fun, challenging conversation, and they're going to get a ton of assets. We're not going to embarrass them. We're going to make them look good. And all of that stuff helps.
It does. It does. Now, let me come back into the show itself, because this is a drum I've been beating, you know, trying to look at trends and where things are happening. And, you know, people often will knock up a podcast, but now, you know, things are getting, it's not necessarily high production values. Anyone can do this, but it's really the thought you're putting into the show. We've got now live streaming. I know people who are putting live streaming and they're pre-recording interviews and dropping those in. There's all of these things that you can do. You know, you might do once a month with 4 guests over an hour versus and then turn that into 4 podcast episodes per week. You know, it's just the different way to look at it. I think the days of let's just have a podcast, that's fine. You know, you can do really well at that. But there are so many other elements now to bring into play, and video being one of them. Why did you go to YouTube? Because of your relationship with Evan Carmichael? I mean, he's done incredibly well on that.
He has.
Is that sort of been good for you, or you were sort of a more, because I know people tend to be veering one way or the other, so they might go kicking and screaming into the other format. If you could pick one, what's it going to be? Podcast, or are you a podcast man, or are you a YouTuber, a video man? I know.
Yeah, I would say both and always. So yes, I definitely, we got onto YouTube specifically because of Evan. I mean, I've known Evan for 15 years now. I shot his very first YouTube video ever made. If you go back to his channel, it's on Disney. You'll see my agency logo there from like 2008 or 9 or something. It's super old and embarrassing. But so the thing with YouTube is YouTube will get you views forever. Right. So a typical podcast stream, if it's non-serialized, you're only going to get mostly listeners who have checked out the last few episodes, and then really hardcore fans might go through your back catalog and listen, and you'll pick up some listenership. If it's serialized, then people will go back, and obviously they want to listen to things in order. But on YouTube, things are, you know, you can put up a video and 5 years later, it can still be getting traffic if the keyword's relevant, the title's relevant, if the viewership's there. And there's revenue sharing in YouTube. Now, you have to hit a certain level for the revenue sharing to be significant, but it's there. And so YouTube makes a lot of sense. But here's why I did things the hardest way possible. I'm a fan of podcasts. I love podcasts. And since like 2007 or 8, I've been listening to everything from all of the different podcast networks, from NPR. Like I super geek out in terms of who owns the networks and what are they doing and what are the new shows. And I love it. And I love what we can do with audio and what we can do with space and how we can weave in and out of stuff. And so I created We Do Hard Things. And if you go back and look at early episodes, it was just about the conversation. And then I was like, oh, there's not enough context and it's going too fast. Let's slow things down a bit. Let's have some background music weave in and out. Let's do some like NPR style breaks, right? Like, you know, and then on YouTube, our retention completely crashes through the floor because on YouTube, someone finds your video, they see the thumbnail, they see the thing, they click it, and you better give them value in the first few seconds. Otherwise they're bouncing. And if they bounce, your retention tanks. If your retention tanks, YouTube won't show this to anyone else.
Good point.
So then suddenly we get hyper quick again. Okay, it's about retention. But then the audio experience now feels so rushed. It's like no one wants to listen to this thing. And so our audio numbers just tank. So then we go back and still think. And so I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, oscillating for about 18 months until I was like, hey, dummy, you got to produce two different things for two different audiences, right? TikTok is not LinkedIn and LinkedIn is not YouTube. Well, guess what? Our audio listeners who are out in the world, they're exercising or they're running errands or they're sitting in traffic or they're sitting on the tram or they're folding laundry. They're, listening to an audio podcast is a secondary thing. Watching something on YouTube, it might be playing in the background, but it can't be a secondary thing because it's just a medium that typically, unless you're on YouTube Premium, requires way more of an active effort. And some people listen to stuff and some people don't. So we just now produce two different versions, one for each. And neither's right or wrong. Neither will kill the other one. Neither one is going to take over. But I will tell you that having a YouTube show, the reason we went that way was actually because I'm building this for sponsorship, right? It's one thing to try and get a sponsor read. Hey, you sponsored our podcast. We gave you a read. I've spent a lot of time in advertising and marketing. What you really want to do is an integration. So what we're building is not a podcast. It's not even a YouTube show. We're about 2 years away from this, but we're actually building a media publication. Email, daily emails and blog posts and articles. So a sponsor can come to us and we can say, hey, it's not just a read, but we're actually going to go ahead and create this whole sponsorship package for you based off of the audience that we've built. So that's still a few years away, but that's why we made that choice.
And do you are you building an email list in the background, trying to get people from the show onto the email list?
Yeah, so we have kind of a three-ringed approach, but the podcast We Do Hard Things is non-monetized at all. We're not building an email list around that. My main goal with that is to get better at this, to make an awesome connections, to build credibility, to build my network, to have a lot of fun, and build my personal brand. Because I will tell you, being a brand strategist who has spent years saying, well, I'm like the cobbler, right? The cobbler's kids have no shoes. I'm so busy working on client work. I don't have. Let me tell you, eventually you feel like a liar. If you're in marketing, if you're in advertising, if you own an agency, if you're a consultant and you haven't built it for yourself first of all, it's your total laboratory where you can learn all of these things. But if you haven't done it, how could you possibly be the authority on it? And so this many years in, the big reason we're doing We Do Hard Things is I love it. It helps me practice. It helps give me credibility. It helps with my network. But more importantly, I could not go on another day being an agency owner who embarrassingly hadn't even built a personal brand to the level that I would be happy with. And so that's why we're doing this. And then that feeds into the agency we own, Phantom Media, that we're currently in a rebrand of, but it will be in the new year, Core 3 Brandworks. And that helps service the people who might be our listeners, who might be our viewers, who we might work with. And then we have our own content plan and we help with events and other things that also feed that. So, Trucks, you mentioned Anthony Trucks. I had him on the podcast. I met him at an event. Backstage, we hung out. We became friends. Now we're working together on a few things. So I don't want people to think of the podcast, especially if you're a thought leader. People often think in terms of speaking, which is siloed from writing my book, which is different from content, which is different from podcast, which is different from a corporate sponsorship or whatever. All of these things feed into one another because, as you know, your network is everything, right?
Hey, it's Trevor, just breaking in here quickly to let you know about an exciting program I've just launched over at Credible Authority Academy. It's called Accelerator, and it's a comprehensive online course designed to help experts and business leaders like you to grow your visibility and influence in a way that's strategic, sustainable, and respectful. It starts on Monday, February the 13th, but an early bird discount and bonus training applies for action takers. Included in this promotion is a free upgrade to the Accelerator Plus membership. This is a 12-month program of learning, support, and accountability to help keep you motivated and on track. Like to know more? Jump on the credibleauthority.com website, scroll down just a little bit until you come to the Accelerator program, hit the link, and it's all there. Okay, on with the show. I'm glad you brought that up because, that is the thing that, and one thing I like what you're doing is that, you're doing a podcast or a show that's different to your core business, but it's kind of not. Like, and you've just explained that, because that was a question I was going to ask, because I think, sometimes we get hung up that it's got to be, so aligned with the business, and I get it. And I think, in most cases, that's probably a sound strategy, but it doesn't mean that you can't go off and veer off a little bit. And if there's a dotted line back to, if you're a lawyer and you're doing a podcast about the best coffee places around the world, well, then that's just a hobby. But, one of my previous guests, Alex Martin, he's got a business podcast, and but he's a lawyer, and the law stuff feeds into the business podcast. So they're things that we need to open our eyes and just be a little bit more, what are we passionate about, and how can we align it to our business and our personal brand? Because, it's not a persona you're crafting, but it's really who you are.
I have to say, I think the lawyer who has a coffee podcast is the smartest.
No, he doesn't have a coffee one.
I'm saying, if you're listening, the lawyer who has a coffee podcast is the smartest strategic move I think you could make. And here's why. I always think of, this is my third podcast. My first was called a Not So Corporate Podcast, and it was all about corporate video. And then the second podcast was the one I did with my friend for 2 years, Evan Carmichael, Something to Prove. And then now We Do Hard Things. But I often think of, I think of the person on the train after a long day at work. So imagine that, we talked about business, right? Let's talk about marketing. This is about marketing. And no knock to anyone who runs a podcast like this. So with forgiveness, I might even be knocking you right now because we're so tactical and so detailed. But imagine if I'm a marketer and I spend all day in the trenches marketing, and then I'm like, oh, okay. And then I'm waiting in line, and then the doors open, and I sit down on the train, and it's a long commute home, and I put on headphones. I want escapism. I want entertainment. I want something curious and something interesting, and anything other than, now let's spend 22 minutes learning about the tactics of marketing, right? And so part of what we do, even with our own branded content, is we try to ensure that it's entertaining first. Yeah, people want to learn, and they want answers to their questions. And there's something about a domain expertise where the more time you spend listening to these types of things and absorbing this stuff, it's going to help you. But what I want to tap into is the person who's had just a very long day, and the last thing they want to do is learn some stuff. Or, when a podcast comes up on your feed and you go, oh, it's Thursday, right? They drop podcasts on Thursday. I can't wait to listen to this. Like that feeling, that's what I want to create in the content that I put out. That's what I want to create in the content that we help other people put out.
Yep.
But I think often when we're just focused on like the business thing, I'm a lawyer, I'm going to talk about being a lawyer. No, if you're passionate about coffee, talk about coffee, because guess what? People will love that. They'll go home on the train. They want to learn about coffee. It's part of their hobby. It's part of the third place. And then when they find out you're a lawyer, they're like, well, I must trust this person. He has a coffee podcast, and they'll just hire you, right?
That's true. And that's when you're doing it as a passion project, and it probably, comes out. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying that, most people I deal with, they want a content marketing strategy. But if people, and I've known stacks of them there, the creatives who want something different because for exactly that, I'm passionate about this, and this becomes a sideline, and sometimes it takes over their business. How often have we seen that? People do something as a not even a side hustle, it's just a sideline passion, and because of that enthusiasm and they love doing it, it takes off, and sometimes that takes over from their real
Slack.
gig. We see that's the creator economy, right? But I guess the other part is to, and this is the problem, and we cover this as a theme on the show here, but, thought leader versus expert. And some people, I believe, veer one way or the other. You can do people who are both, and I love those people who can hybrid. But an expert goes deep and best practice and educates and how to, and all of, as you just said. The thought leader is inspiring and changing the way you think about a topic or an issue, and might provoke your thought. And that's what podcasting and shows like this are great at doing, because we want to get out of our echo chamber and think a bit deeper on topics. So that side of things. And if you can entertain at the same time as provoke thought in a good way, not necessarily being controversial, that's a real winning mix.
There's an audience for everything. There really, really is. It may not be huge, it may not be massive, but there is an audience for everything. It's just your job to create content that's worth listening to. It's your job to stand out and be different. It's your job to do everything you can to get that content, your content, in front of people, because they're not going to look for it. They're not going to search for it. Study after study after study has proven that objective quality does not matter for popularity. Jonah Berger, this great professor, wrote a book. He's written a series of books, but in one of his books, I think it's called, it wasn't Contagious, it was his second book, Influence. He talks about the fact that they wrote this algorithm where they took all of these songs and they just went ahead and said, like, hey, 50 people, listen to this music. And over the course of a month, it tracked what the quote-unquote most popular songs were. And you would think that the most popular songs would be the best produced songs. That's not the case. When they just went ahead and said, hey, guys, listen to music, and there was no structure, every single time they ran it, it was a different series of songs with the top 5. When they said, hey, guys, here are the top songs, but people could see the rankings, whatever happened to fall within the first 5 in the first few minutes stayed the top 5 forever. It could not break the psychology of going, well, if it's in the top 5, it must be good. Right? Yeah. So what does this mean for us as content creators, as thought leaders, as podcasters? One, it's very hard to break into the top 5 if you're in a marketplace that has already been set, even if you have better content. Now let's flip this. What do you need to do to break into the top 5? And guess what? If you can break into the top 5 and you can actually get there, as long as it takes and however much money it takes and how much time and passion and all those things it takes, but once you get in, you're now protected. You're now part of that group. You're perceived to be the best podcast out there, even if that's not the case. So this comes down to authority marketing or credibility hacking or doing whatever, we talk about here. Part of the reason you know how many viewers I have on my podcast is because we publicize that. Right? Like we want people to know, hey, we've had like close to almost 4 million views. Well, is that a credibility point? Maybe. I mean, if you break down and do the math and you go, okay, you've had over 100 episodes and there's 4 million, and that means that some of them have 400,000, but I know not all of them do. And so like, if you start to break down the math, you can actually start to see some holes in the logic, but I don't want you to go that far. I just want you to go, wow, 3.8 million views. Wow, over 100 guests. You've been doing this 2 years. You have almost 30,000 subscribers on YouTube. Wow, you must be great.
Yep. And with that too, I mean, it's the body of work. I just did a piece yesterday actually about the importance of doing the reps and the body of work and getting into it for the long haul, which is something clearly you've done. You're committed. You're looking forward and where the plans are and what the goals are for the show. Tell me, you're a big thinker. You're all about being bold and what's you're saying? Think big, be bold, say yes. Unpack that for us. I mean, that comes through in what I've seen you do. So it's about living your brand, I guess. How has this more motivational, big thinking message come through? Has it just been a natural thing? Has it been something that you've hidden for a while and bursting to get out?
I did come up with those words, think big, be bold, say yes, as a personal mantra back in like 2012, I think, or 2013. And so it became kind of my tagline when I started this personal brand journey a few years ago. But it's all the same, think big, be bold, say yes. We do hard things. Our show is the show about, fighting fear and chasing down dreams and taking big swings. Like all of it comes back to the same thing, which is that I know for us to do extraordinary things, we have to be pushed outside of our comfort zone. Whatever got us here will not get us there. We have to level up. We have to grow. Like all of those mindset-y type things, I think we can all agree to. But the think big, be bold, say yes was me realizing that even when I thought I was thinking big, I was not thinking anywhere near as big as I could have been. When I started my agency, all I wanted to do was just make stuff and not go bankrupt. And then it became like, hey, how can we get to 1 million revenue? And the first 3 or 4 years, like if you looked at us, it was laughable. And then somehow over the course of like 18 months or 24 months, we went from $300,000 revenue to 1 million revenue. And I was like, like one day I just woke up and I found myself like, oh, I had hit my goal and I didn't even realize it. Okay, what next? Right? Well, I guess maybe 2 million revenue or maybe television commercials. And then we're doing television commercials. It's like, Okay. And then we're working with NBA players and airlines and the team. Like, it just, even when I thought I was thinking big, it was nowhere near as big as you and I should think, because frankly, we're capable of doing some pretty remarkable things if we can just imagine it and believe in it, which comes to the next step, right? Be bold. By nature, I'm actually not that bold. So I don't think as big as I should. I should think bigger. I'm not anywhere near as bold as I should be, and I'm working so hard to get bolder. But, we all have the critic. We all have self-doubt. We all have, inferiority complexes, or maybe we like to self-sabotage, or maybe we just like to be the victim, or whatever it is. But I'm nowhere near as bold as I should be. And every time I take bold action for the right reasons, when I want to serve, when I want to help, when I just get the courage up to ask, even asking for help, which is some of the boldest things I've had to do, is admit to people when things aren't going well and ask for help. It always works out. People rally, people give, people want to help. And so it's like, man, I just need to be bold. And then the last thing is say yes, because by nature I say no to everything. Like my default is no. And so it's not that people ask me for stuff all the time, and I say yes to all of their stuff all the time. I say yes if you're a prospect, if you want help, if you want to jump on a call, I say yes to everyone. I don't say yes to any of my stuff. I say no to most of my stuff because I just don't have energy for my stuff. It just seems too hard or too scary or too big, or like, can I do it? It's going to take how long? It's going to take how much work? So I settle for like no, because no is easier than trying and failing. And so that's what think big, be bold, say yes means to me. And that's why it's my mantra, because every day it's like, damn, like my Evan will email me and say, Mark, is this you being bold? I don't think it is. Is this you thinking big? I don't think it is. You're not even saying yes. You're not even releasing Instagram videos. Where the hell have you been? You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing yourself. Let's go. So that's the mantra.
Right. And I love the fact that this is kind of like, I guess, the vulnerability thing that we're hearing now about why creators are getting out and building brands. We've gone past that. Aren't I great? All the old school thought leaders who thought the world revolved around them. The new school thought leaders is about bringing people along for the journey and saying that things aren't always going to be 100% because they can't possibly be. But I like this, it's whether it's like making things in public, growing in public, evolving in public, talking about those challenges while at the same time working with others to overcome them as well. I think there's a lot in that, because that that's a message that resonates across the board.
Vulnerability is my superpower, because I don't think I have as good of a filter as everyone else. Like, I will probably ask, like, any question you ask me, I will answer honestly, just between you and I, and then later I'll go, oh, right, there's people listening to this or watching it. And so, our greatest strengths are our greatest weaknesses. It's also a huge weakness of mine. Like I don't play the game well. I don't play politics well. I'm wearing my heart on my sleeve. I'm super honest with everyone. I've gotten into huge trouble by just saying things to people that later someone else hears and they think I'm slagging them off, when that wasn't the case at all. Vulnerability is awesome, but there's also something to stoicism and being a really great leader. So I respect some of the old school guys and women, specifically for the way they handle themselves in business, because in this world of vulnerability, I'm actually really good at this, but sometimes business just requires, like, I don't know, a stone cold heart, doesn't it?
Well, maybe, but a beating heart doesn't hurt. So you just mentioned, self-doubt, self-sabotage, these things that, it's a bigger issue, I think, often for people who have got the runs on the board and the as I like to say, the scars on the knuckles to prove it. They've been in the trenches for a long time, and now's the time to put themselves out there. They're the ones who should be profiting from their knowledge and their experience and their wisdom, and sometimes they're the least likely to do it for a variety of reasons. Walk me through how you work with clients. I mean, clients are clearly coming to you because they want to elevate, they want to get out there, they want to push their message and stuff. By the time they get to you, are they pretty fully formed like that and they're pretty keen to go, or do you have to push people to think bigger, to take more risks? Walk us through your thinking on that and how you're dealing with people to come out of the shell and be out there. That's a technical term in air quotes, to be out there.
It's such a great question, and it's essentially why we're so good at what we do at the agency here. A lot of the work that I've had to do on my own personal brand, but also just on my own growth, gets wrapped in. A lot of the psychology gets wrapped into our process and approach, because there is this myth out there that entrepreneurs, thought leaders, executives, that somehow they talk a big game, or they're very, very ego driven. And that might be true in certain settings, but in my experience, entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, executives, C-suite people, as soon as you put them into another environment, like on a stage, like writing a book, like on a podcast, like having to do content, like having to do any of these things, they know that things have changed, or they know it's a different world, or they know that it's slightly that it's this weird mix of technical, and it's like they get into overwhelm land, and so they retreat. They retreat into their shell. Most people think of the entrepreneur as this big talker who's selling a dream, but they can't back it up. In my experience, people are way more badass than their brand ever lets on. They have way more experience that they don't even realize, because you've lived a career and you don't realize how cool some of the things that are that you've done. I went through this exercise where even myself, like running an agency, I've done some pretty cool things, and my website now says this a little bit better, but it was, I was talking to someone, I was like, oh yeah, I've met NBA players because we shot a commercial with them. And they're like, you did? It's like, yeah, we got a 747 twice for a day because we shot with these airlines and we had to do this stuff. And all of our equipment got completely impounded as we tried to get in Dominican Republic. We had to shoot a commercial and this whole thing. Like, I have all these stories of just some of the weirdest situations I found myself in. And it's every day for me. Like, I don't even think about it.
Yeah.
And so when I work with someone, regardless of the industry, regardless of their seniority, how fully baked their idea is, or how much experience they have, in almost all cases, they're not willing to be as declarative as they should be. They're not willing to say stuff that will get people to perk up and actually listen. They're not willing to take a stand. They completely downplay how awesome they are, their past experience. Most people who want to be seen and known go out there and do it. Grant Cardone's a great example. He wanted to be seen and known. He went out there and he's now seen and he's now known. The people who come to us for help are the ones who are usually a little bit more bashful or a little bit more concerned, or just they need help filtering through the stuff that matters and doesn't matter. What can we spin slightly? What can we facelift a bit? What experiences are the best? And then frankly, how can we show you and give you the resources or the confidence you need to make some pretty big, bold moves? And that's not just investments. That's often claims.
Yeah.
I always say it's not marketing's job to dumb down what it says just because people are afraid to deliver, right? It's operations or delivery's job to live up to the bold claims marketing has to make in order to sell stuff. And so taking that approach of like, we're going to go out there and make big claims and be aspirational and be really big. And yeah, it's up to you to not lie, and it's up to you to live up to who you say you want to be. But ultimately, that's how we help people.
And I like the fact that you've said, it's the same thing that I see in working with experts and thought leaders or aspiring thought leaders, or just people. I hate all the terms, but we're kind of stuck with them. But you know what I mean? That they've been around, they've done some really cool stuff. They got really good runs on the board, and they know stuff. But the other thing they've got, apart from knowledge and experience, is they've got the stories. Yes. And I like drawing the stories out of them, because it's the stories that matter. You're a storyteller. Clearly you've got a whole podcast full of stories. It's the key. It's the one that really will differentiate you, because a lot of people might have person A's got this experience and knowledge, and person B has, and they're both very similar. But it's the ones with the stories and the willingness to put it out there a little bit more and to tell it with passion and heart.
Can I tell you, I was at an event working behind the scenes with Les Brown and his team in Queens, New York, the summer before last. And at the end of the day, at the very long event, one of his students. So Les Brown works with people to help them become better storytellers. Now, I don't have a pony in this race. I'm not attached to the organization in any way, but basically this woman stood up and was like, well, I was a salesperson at this company, and I was doing really great, and then they fired me. Then I went out and started my own thing. And Les Brown literally walks on the stage and goes, stop. And he puts his hand on this woman's shoulder and he says, this woman right here worked in the medical device industry, and she was the only person in the company. She was their best salesperson, and she felt she deserved a raise, so she asked for a raise. And what did they do? They fired her. So she went out and started her own little company. This CEO who had the gall to fire the only woman in the company approached her and said, I want to buy you. And during the due diligence, they open up the books to her, and she sees that she was responsible for 70% of their sales. So instead, she buys that company. The company who fired her as the only woman salesperson, within 5 years, she owns that company, and she's tripled it and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, it was the most remarkable moment to me because this woman, the same story, she's like, well, I did this and then this. And then Les Brown, the master storyteller, comes out there and just sells the hell out of the story. And I'm like, I got goosebumps. I'm like, yeah, it's like, this is like a movie that's unfolding in front of me. And he did it in just a few lines. And so I am nowhere near that. I aspire to be more like that. But if anything to be taken from this, it's like, just, you have some really cool stories that happen to you. Just figure out how to tell them and just practice and get better at it.
And you just raised a good point there about, people like Les Brown, who's, he is quite motivational. He's probably a required taste for some people, but they tell stories, and the people that you interview tell stories, and they're, I love listening to Lisa Bilyeu. I mean, she's so enthusiastic, and she's telling stories, and she's really open, and, she's been on an amazing, amazing journey. And so I think that as people who create content, it's too easy to get stuck into our own zones and our own lanes and all of that sort of stuff, and look too much at our competition and who's doing what in our space. Get out and listen to these people. The storytellers are the ones out there telling stories. They're out there on podcasts. They're out there, got their own shows. They're doing things. They write books. They do all of this. And broaden, I've always told people, broaden out of your own zone and your own area and your own profession, and get out of business and take in what other people are doing. And that will, I greatly believe that it makes a massive difference in how you approach your own stories, content,
Yes.
that side of things.
Two things I would recommend. One, I didn't even realize that this was prepping me for the life I would live one day. But remember how I said I listened to a lot of podcasts, and back in 2007, I found this podcast called How Sound, which is a podcast by a guy who teaches how to make audio documentaries, like NPR style audio documentaries. And so his podcast is all on the deconstruction of audio documentaries. So super weird and niche. And I listened to this for a whole bunch of years, but they would have producers on and storytellers and all these people, and they would talk about the tricks that they use and how they edit stuff. And I learned so much about storytelling. Like there's this trick that producers use or storytellers use called the E story, which is you start, if you're thinking about writing an E, and if you're listening, imagine how you'd write an E. Maybe you start at the bottom and loop up, but if you start in the middle and you move forward and then you go up and around and down. I remember this. There's this E storytelling technique. So what you would do is you start the story today, right? I told you today is my 16th anniversary at Phantom Media. I started 16 years ago. And in the story, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. And then as you move forward in time, you're going to stop and say, but wait, let me take you back to 2006 and what it was like. And that's you doing the loop back in time. And I'll go, well, in 2006, it was a different world, and social media wasn't what it was, and blah, 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 blah. And then I'll take you maybe through 2009, 2011, 2015, and I will bring you back to today. But the story's not done yet because we still have the future ahead of us and where we're going. Like this technique, this E technique, this structure is just one of like a ton of structures that are out there for storytelling. And if you look at what Vox does in terms of its Vox on YouTube, they always do the like, but wait, here's a question. I'm going to ask a rhetorical question that has no answer, but we're going to spend the next 13 minutes exploring what the possibilities are. And hopefully at the end, we'll arrive at some kind of commentary. That's a storytelling technique. So I didn't even realize that all this stuff that I just thought was really cool was helping prepare me perhaps for this. But the same thing is true with anyone who's listening or watching, right? All of your past experiences, all of the things that you're interested in, all of that will craft you into what you bring to stage, what you bring to the book, what you bring to your podcast, what you bring to your blog, what you bring to what you do. And so don't work too hard on trying to be like the lawyer for lawyers. Go out and be that coffee dude.
Amen. I like the E. I was visualizing that as you were doing. I started off with a capital E, so I'm glad you
sorry. See, lowercase e.
Lowercase E. I was going to say that is magnificent. That's that just simplifying things, isn't it? Like this is the whole thing about communication and frameworks, and taking somewhat complex things and simplifying them, and it's an unsung is it the word, an unsung skill. It's really hard to do, and if you can do it, and it's not dumbing it down, it's just simplifying it for people who are in a rush or they're listening to you and doing something else. It's making life easy, and it's cutting through. And you've got to resonate with your hook and your message and all that, but then you've got to not just resonate, but then cut through and hopefully people take action on basis of what you're talking about.
But here's the last thing I'll leave you with, and this is what really turned it for me. I spent a lot of time on this, and I feel kind of guilty about that. I spent a lot of time on my podcast. I spent a lot of time having conversations and learning about this stuff and researching stuff. And I often think like, should I be with my kids or my wife? Or should I be making more money? Or should I be with my team, or all these other priorities? And here's what I realized. My kids will grow up, and I'm going to spending time with them, right? My wife is there for me. My business will grow or contract. It'll come and go. I'll own one or multiple ones. But me, the skill set of being a storyteller or being comfortable speaking to people or communicating, this is something that will serve me for today and for tomorrow and for the rest of my life in any situation that I take it into. So I have to believe that listening and being a conversationalist and asking really interesting questions and being a better storyteller, that is perhaps one of the most important things you could focus on today, because that is the underlying skill set that will serve you in all areas of life and business for everything you do, regardless if TikTok is a thing or not, or Instagram is a thing or not, or LinkedIn or what have you, whether we're on camera or it's audio or it's some kind of hologram thing in the future. We don't know what's going to happen, but I can assure you that your ability to tell a story or to ask interesting questions or to listen will be something that will serve you in every area of your life forever. So let's get better at that.
Awesome. Great note to end.
Soapbox. Sorry.
Mark, what's the best place for people to find you online, and give them the details on the podcast again? I highly recommend it. I actually like watching the videos, but it's you've got some great guests who are pretty full on, and I love it. I love it, and the production techniques, and the shorts you're doing on YouTube and that sort of stuff, and the little digital breadcrumbs that you're putting out there, and the show seems to be expanding, and you're doing some different things as well as some commentary, as well as the interviews. So I like that it's being mixed up.
Oh, well, thank you. We're always trying stuff. Yeah, if you want to check out a few of my favorite episodes, head over to YouTube at Mark Drager. We had a little over a month ago, we had George Carlin's daughter on, Kelly Carlin, to talk about comedy. We had this amazing man, Colin O'Brady, who holds tons of world records and climbed mountains, but is the first person to actually walk across Antarctica. I think he did in like 54 days, unassisted, pulling a huge sled. And we've had professors on, and we've had Vishen Lakiani on from Mind Valley, and just a bunch of really, really cool people spreading from athletics to business to authors. And if you want to connect with me, head over to Instagram. You can DM me. My handle is at Mark Drager.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Mark. I've really enjoyed it. It's got me going on the day, and I'm thinking bold already. And I might even do a really big E and stick it up on my wall. And the E storytelling technique, I love it.
There you go. Thank you for having me, Trevor.
Terrific. Thanks, Mark.
The reputation economy is here. The world today needs more genuine, credible experts and leaders to stand up and share their experience, their wisdom, their stories and ideas. Are you in?